Boom. Greetings and much love to everyone at Sunship Lifestyle Community, as well as Life Mindset Mentors and streaming live on Facebook. This in particular is a series that is being done specifically for Sunship Lifestyle Community. I am simultaneously streaming this live in Life Mindset Mentors as well as on our YouTube channel presently. My name is Zine Pierre. I am the founder and headmaster mentor of the International Institute of Neonatology. And Paulie B in particular is a very, very dear and close friend and brother of mine. And so I'm also one of the coaches at Sunship Lifestyle Community, as well as he is actually one of the teachers, official teachers and coaches under the International Institute of Neonatology. All right. So tonight in particular, I actually agreed with him to do a series of videos this month. So this is actually the first of three videos that we're actually going to be covering concerning the garden dynamics of healing. Right? Now, before we actually dive into anything concerning the Garden of Eden, I thought it would be only just and fair and only necessary to give context to what we'll be diving into so that everyone can have a little idea as to what's not only the dynamics of the garden, but actually how it was brought into credibility as well as the story behind it. All right. Now, for those of you who actually may be joining, if you are joining me, just want to actually double check that everybody is actually seeing me. Okay. If you're seeing me, just kindly indicate that you are. Let's make sure that I'm streaming live. All right. Let's see Sunship. So this first part of this live in particular is not going to be very long. All right, I am streaming live. Great. Yeah, so this is actually not going to be very long. Tonight, particularly, I thought I'd start by introducing what we're going to be talking about for the next couple of weeks on a Friday night. All right, so for those of you who would actually be looking at this now and looking at this in the as a recording, I actually, in agreement with Paulie B in particular, decided to take the Fridays in particular for the rest of the year. So you all can actually look forward to seeing me every Friday at 8 p.m. EST, which should be 7 p.m. CST. We are, well, I'll be occupying that time slot at Sunship Lifestyle Community, 7 p.m. CST, 8 p.m. EST, but not every week would be an actual live. I would try my best as possible to do at least 1 to 2 lives for the month, and the other weeks of the month in particular, we would stream a pre-recorded video where everybody will be free to ask questions, and I will be very attentive and ensure that your questions are answered promptly. So, what is the story? What is the story behind the International Institute of Dermatology and the garden dynamics that we're going to be speaking about here today? For those of you in particular who know me, okay, huge shout out to Kitura, who's actually joining us in the comment section. For those of you in particular who have known me for some time, what I'm about to say here may sound familiar. And for those of you who have not seen me before and have not familiar with me in any form of fashion, I'll just kindly introduce myself. My name is Zane Pei. I am the founder and um, headmaster mentor of the International Institute of Pneumatology, that is dedicated to the pragmatic and experimental research of the ancient Hebrew principle of the scriptures, as well as the energetic mechanics of spirit and inadvertently all spirit, simply what spirit is and how spirit functions. Right? We in particular are very much focused the on identifying the context of the scriptures through the lens of the authors, which are the ancient Hebrew priests. Well, sorry, the authors are prophets and so on, but through the lens of the ancient Hebrew priests, who are the ones that taught the scriptures in the scriptures and in Israel's history, as well as coming to an understanding as to how the human energy works, so that we can intentionally restore life, long life, healing to humanity. Right? Our desire is to eliminate sickness and death from humanity. Right? So what is this story? So I'll actually start with a very, very brief synopsis as to where I came from. And I am actually born in Venezuela, but grew up here in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, West Indies. Right? Well, I in particular, in the context of what we're speaking about here, I actually grew up in Trinidad and Tobago and predominantly in a Christian home. Right? Now, where I grew up in particularly, I I can safely say that I grew up in a home that was in a spiritually hostile atmosphere, where there were persons around who were actively involved in in certain practices. And so, as a child, even though I grew up in a predominantly Christian home, to be more specific, under more the Pentecostal influence, even though I went to Catholic schools and I came into contact with different denominational perspectives or different denominations under the Christian umbrella. I grew up predominantly under the Pentecostal persuasion, but went to Catholic school, and so my entire life in particular was very much in awareness of the Pentecostal perspective of God. Right? And when I say I actually grew up in an environment that was spiritually hostile, I grew up in a home where it was normal for me to actually see supernatural happenings. Where, for example, where in the example you see a room in darkness, it's like one of my memories is seeing a room in darkness and hearing tables and chairs moving, pots stirring, and there's nothing there, but you're actively hearing that these things are moving. Right? So I grew up in particular in on under the Pentecostal persuasion, was educated in it, and um, let's say throughout my childhood as well as teens, I was pretty much taught the Bible from the Pentecostal persuasion. When I came into my 20s, you can safely say that I began to take a more active role in my Christianity, taking a more taking up more responsibility for what I do. I was one of those persons in particular that applied what I had been taught actively. I was not involved in much official church organizational responsibilities because I always found that it was a bit burdensome. But I took what I had been taught and applied it with everything that I knew. Right? So if you're looking for someone who did long hours of prayer, fasting, praying for 10 hours a day, going for a whole weekend, so it's actually practical application. So, and not only practical application of those tenets, but also very much the practical application of everything I had been known that I had known to walk in a relationship with God. This in particular is actually was a sum total of 32 years until I got to the point of being exhausted, right? And I got to the point of being exhausted after two significant events, which were the death, no, three, the deaths of my father, my biological father, and my grandmother and an aunt, right? So I was one of those in particular that applied it militantly to be able to have this relationship that I had been taught that I should have. And through that period of time, let's say, how do I put this across? I applied myself to what I had been taught for some time, for that period of time. And one day in particular, my father actually caught a stroke one evening, and that evening in particular, I attempted to apply everything that I had been taught, everything that I had been educated with through the Pentecostal perspective, including the use of anointing oil, applied it with passion to him without any sort of results, and eventually reached the point of begging God to stop what was taking place. Right? He was then taken to the hospital, and the following day we received a phone call indicating that he had passed. Right? Now, that in particular was one of the first events that pretty much caused me to question what I had known. Right? First there was the denial, which was I didn't do what I was supposed to do. I was lacking something. I wasn't anointed enough. I was not walking in enough power. And with that in particular, it's usually the next step is to seek scriptural justification for God taking him. And I continued with that for some time, and not long after, an, um, an aunt of mine passed. Right, and she particularly was one that actually suffered from cancer, and after a long and demising battle with cancer, she passed. And when she passed, there were some unexplainable happenings that again caused me to question what it is was going on. Why are we not walking? Why are we not experiencing? Why are people? Why wasn't she healed? Why wasn't my father healed? And shortly after that, my grandmother, which is my father's mother, passed. And just before she passed, there were also some other questionable events where she, in particular, apparently was actually leaving the body and said some things in particular that really threw my understanding of Christianity for a loop. Right? All of that I'm not going to get into here, but these were three events in particular that were highly impacting and began to cause me to question what had been taught and to even search more. Now, I had been continuing to search, and I continued to search through the lens of the Pentecostalism with continuously no manifestation of power. And in 2014, particularly, I got to the point of being exhausted because it was a lot of work, a lot of study, and study through the Pentecostal lens, that is, and there was still little to no manifestation. I took a trip to Colombia in 2014, December 2014, and encountered a group of people in Colombia that flipped my entire Christian perspective. I visited these people, a particular church in Colombia, and the supernatural was very present, it was very, very evident. I saw a lot of things in particular that I wouldn't take the time to talk about here. A lot of supernatural events that really caused me to question how is it that these people are actually experiencing this, but the God that I am serving in the Caribbean, I have never seen any of this. It's never been a reality. Right? So that in particular caused pretty much an identity crisis, because simply if what you are taught is what you trust, therefore then we build an identity based on what we know. And if what I had known was wrong, then my identity was wrong, and therefore this would have resulted, this would result in pretty much a waste of existence. Right? So I returned to Trinidad in January of 2015, and I reasoned to myself, took a professional break, and because of the mental state I had been in through the identity crisis that I was facing, I couldn't think. I felt it like there was no bearings because my entire identity was based on what I had known. And when I saw what I saw, then I realized that what I had known had to be wrong. Something had to be off. And so when I got back to Toronto, I reasoned to myself that it's either the Bible was clearly wrong, it was a lie, or I use the analogy of a bag of diamonds, that either or the bag of diamonds that I think that I have in my hands are not diamonds, is actually figured glass. And so, because of my experiences throughout my childhood and teenage years, young adulthood, I had a lot of supernatural experiences with God, but few and far in between. They were sporadic, and I was never able to identify what was the dynamic that was actually causing it, other than what I'd been told that if you lock yourself away, pray and seek God, He will reveal Himself to you. So that caused me to really question what I had known, and in questioning it, I began to reason that it's either, well, in 2014, I was at the point of leaving Christianity 100% when I got to the point of being exhausted behind this labor and consistently being told that I was not enough, that I was not serving God in the way that I should be serving God. I was not putting God first, even though I was searching this out with all of me. Then in 2015, of January of 2015, I decided that I would give Christianity one more chance. Right? Last straw. This last straw, particularly, would be that I would engage Christianity through a different perspective. Instead of looking at it through the doctrinal perspective, I look at it through a perspective of functionality. So I decided I would put a scientific criteria or an empirical criteria to it, which is where I decided I would use my knowledge of translation. My first profession is translation. I've been a translator for almost 20 years. Not Hebrew or Greek, but English, Spanish professional, course translation, and legal translation, as well as translation for industrial technical fields like oil and gas. And so I decided I'd use the science of translation, my understanding of the science of translation, to begin to pull apart the scriptures. I first decided I would take my knowledge of the science of translation, because languages may vary, but the science of translation is consistent. For every language, the science of translation is consistent. The principles, the concepts of translation remains the same. And so I decided I would take my knowledge of translation and apply it to the scriptures, to the Bible. Right? Well, that in particular would have been accompanied by a very empirical approach we would where I would study the scriptures with a group. I started with a group of people. We started to study the scriptures, and through my analysis of the scriptures, through my comprehension of translation, analyzing the text, the original text, and measuring the translation to the actual concepts of the text. This was actually going to be coupled with an empirical criteria, which is a series of experiments that we will conduct in the application of what we had what we have actually found in our investigation, in our research. And if it didn't work, we'll come back to the scriptures to find out what is missing, to see why it is not working. In this in particular, the first person that I encountered throughout this process was Corey Blake and the Divine Healing Technician training. when I found the Divine Healing Technician training, I found the Newman series. Right, just around that same time, I actually learned who Pete Cabrera was, Todd White was, and even saw Paul Brown. Right, and I went through the DHC, Divine Healing Technician training, and I began. I went through that training session about six times at least, right? Absorbing it, taking notes, studying what he presented, and in March of 2015 was the first time that I saw any type of results. Right? I was able to actually lay hands and see healing for someone else, and I was able to actually access healing for myself in March of 2015. Right? When I actually had that experience of healing, being able to lay hands and see healing on somebody else and healing for me, that felt like the very first time in my life that I actually took a breath. I felt like I can breathe. And so the Divine Healing Technician training in particular, it pretty much gave me the direction to begin to question what I had known and to take a look at the scriptures in a more pragmatic manner, not just reading it based on what I had been taught, but reading it to understand it very carefully, slowly, and pulling apart scripture. Right? That in particular was incorporated with then incorporated with the research where I applied my knowledge of translation and literally went through at least 10 to 12 versions of the Bible to be able to identify first the perspective of each of the translations, the translators. Because as a translator, it would be very easy for me to do that, to be able to identify what is the priority of the translator. Whilst I'm actually comparing the translation to the actual text. Right? Needless to say, this was a process that was ongoing, and having gone through that amount of versions of the Bible, 10 to 12 versions of the Bible, one thing led to the next. But what if it was one thing that was very consistent is that out of in 2015 and 2016, we went through at least 400 experiments, at least experiments with daily for almost 2 years. Right? At least 400 experiments. Right? And that does not count weekends in any form or fashion. Right? At least 400 experiments that we went through within that period of time. And what we realized is that the manifestation through of what we had been taught and the analysis of through what we had been taught proved to be futile. Our manifestation was less than 5%, and what we did manifest was very sporadic. Right? So at the end of 2016 is where I was able to actually conclude that our westernized comprehension of the scriptures is functionally not. It's functionally futile. It has no sort of manifestation. It is very creative, but it had no sort of follow-up. Right? This is literally, this is no exaggeration. Literally, at least 400 experiments through that period of time, taking what we had been taught through the westernized Christian perspectives, applying it with little to no results, less than 5%. Right? So in 2016, I concluded that the westernized perspectives were pretty much a waste of time. It sounded good, it sounded pious, it sounded morally good, but it was functionally dysfunctional. There was no manifestation to it. In 2017, in January of 2017, I decided to begin to take the research to the Jews. So we took the research to beginning to search the Jewish perspective of the scriptures. We dove into Jewish theology and beginning to listen to rabbis. And that was the first time that a lot of the context of the scriptures finally began to connect, and it finally began to make sense, because these are the people who actually inherited the scriptures belong to them. Right? Not very long after, we began to realize that even the modern day Jews of that exist today, a lot of their perspectives are mixed with westernized perspectives. And so even them, they weren't too very much sure as to what the scriptures what the scriptures were speaking about, or rather, two things stood out. Number one, they had they know the scripture, they knew the scriptures, and they know the scriptures, but were unable to give very accurate, functional interpretation of the scriptures because well, for the Orthodox Jews to be able to understand the scriptures is to understand the scriptures through the Messiah. And for the Messianic Jews, their perspectives were very much mixed with Westernized Christian perspectives. So we still saw little to no manifestation, and that caused us to go back in the history. Right? That led us right back to the time of Moses, and which was what we identified as the ancient Hebrew perspective of the scriptures, understanding the scriptures through the lens of the authors, not only New Testament authors, but the Old Testament authors. When we went back to the ancient Hebrew perspective and we began to get context to what we were referring to, and we were able to actually link Rabbi Yeshua's perspective to Moses and to the ancient Hebrews, our manifestation went from 5% to at least 90%. Right? It went to about 85 to 90%. I'll say at least 90%. The majority of that in particular began to become a reality when we began to understand the scriptures through the lens of the ancient Hebrew priests. Right? It was there in particular that we realized that the Torah, as we were taught it, or what we have referred to as the Pentateuch in our modern day culture, was very fanciful. It was a very westernized perspective of it. A very Greco-Roman approach to the Torah, and the lens of the scriptures, starting from the book of Genesis, from the Garden of Eden narrative, to the lens of the ancient Hebrew perspective, to the lens of the ancient Hebrew priests, to the lens of the ancient Hebrew priests, was dramatically different, and it was through the priesthood, through their lens, that the scriptures come alive. Right? Now, having actually just given you that rundown, we began to see manifestation in many different ways. Right? We began to be able to see manifestation both with regards to healing, but not long after that, to be able to understand, once we actually got there, the next curiosity that came that we began to pursue was really understanding what is the spiritual construct of the creation. How is it constructed? Where are we in the hierarchy of the of authority? And how does the spiritual dynamic of the creation work? What is the kingdom? How does that work? Right? How do we function as spiritual beings? And how do we interface with creation as spiritual beings, spirit to spirit? What is the dynamic of all of creation? And so the research led in that direction, and we were able to see results in many different areas with regards to understanding our authority. Well, we say authority very loosely in the Westernized community and in the Christian arena, but really understanding what our position was in the order of creation and how the authority works, how it energetically works, the energetic dynamics of that authority. That led us to be able to change the weather at will, to direct creation, to direct animals, to be able to cause growth, to direct the winds, to be able to cause physiological changes, and to have an interface with God in the same way that the priests of the Old Covenant interface with God. We have proven that this is all real. This is all real and this is true. All right. So what we are about to share here in particular, throughout the next couple of weeks, would be the results of our research coupled with pragmatic and experimental application to prove that it is functional. And so what we share with you, you would be able to apply yourself and see the results and better understand what Yeshua as a rabbi has actually been speaking about, because Yeshua's perspective is also a ancient Hebrew perspective, ancient Hebrew priestly perspective of the scriptures. Everything that he says through the lens of the priests, which is why there's no doubt that there's no surprise that he mentions in, well, the writers in the author of the letters to the Hebrew relates him to high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. His Yeshua's perspective is his true perspective through the lens of the priesthood is not known in our Westernized community. We have been able to identify it. We have been using it and applying it for the last 4 years at least, and have seen dramatic and dynamic results. A lot of it in particular we have not released to the public because personally it contradicts a lot of the westernized or modern perspectives of Christ. And so we have been of the perspective that it is the westernized world in particular is simply not ready for it, but we have been releasing that in bits and pieces. All right. So having said that, throughout the experimental process in particular, we had some remarkable results, and I will take the time to share a few. Right? One in particular, I'll share as they come to mind because I didn't really stop to take time to take note of what 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 um what healings or miracles to share, but I will give them as fast as they come to mind. Right? We actually did take a log of some of them, but the majority of them, honestly and sincerely, the majority of them took place as part of our daily life. Right? We went into literal application of this as a lifestyle militantly for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Right? And a lot of what we experienced came through this being a lifestyle. We made a priesthood. I particularly made a priesthood my life, and was able to experience God in a way that the priests would experience God, the prophets would experience God. Right now, we have had experiences. We have had healings from personal healings from um, me being healed from a squeezed testicle that was actually swollen, that rendered me unable to walk for about 3 days. And at the end of the 3 days, um, after I moped for about 3 days and in pain, that and then got up and was able to see healing, right, which was instantaneous. To back injuries at the gym, one time in particular, I was doing a back exercise. I bent down with the weights and felt that pain shoot up my back and couldn't bend after that. And right in the gym, in applying what we're going to be called, in applying these dynamics, was able to actually um, um, access healing in less than 15 minutes. Right? Just speaking to it, giving it for about a few seconds, and boom, my back was restored, and I did not have to lie down in a bed for any amount of time for months at a time. Right? The others in particular were persons in the gym pretty much pulled and pulled muscles that actually cause severe headaches, and was able to speak to speak to them and see pain move. From that to being able to cause physiological changes, grow limbs, make body parts bigger, some smaller, applied healing. We've seen healing of many different things from headaches um, to sicknesses like fevers. Not most of these things don't come to mind right now. Um, Viruses. Wow, my mind has gone blank. Right, we have seen, we actually applied it to persons. Right, broken limbs, limbs that was actual limbs and body parts that were operated on. One went through about 12 surgeries and was fully restored. I can't even remember. Wow, my mind just went blank. Right, but there have been many. There have been many. Right, and even not only with regards to healing directly, where we intentionally want to actually heal, but even with regards to experimenting with the dynamics of the garden. Right, one in particular I do remember was actually sitting down in a hospital and applying the dynamics to the entire ward, to the entire floor, and in less than 3 to 4 hours, about 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours, the entire ward recovered and was sent home. Right? And nurses stood there amazed that for the first time in life that they actually stood up in hospital on the ward and the ward was empty. There was no work to do on that ward. They literally began to close the um, to close the doors and take off the lights. Right? Um, Another in particular was another example is cerebral palsy. One, I actually one of for those of you who know Lady Katura, her younger son in particular was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, and when I met him, he was motionless, not saying anything, motionless, just lying there. Right, and this was even before we even came into the knowledge of it's just through Curry Blake's DHT, not even through the dynamics of the garden, that I actually laid hands on him and commanded him to function. Right? And he began to crawl, began to move, and later, and as time progressed, he began to speak, to be able to communicate. Right? And his healing is still in progress. Right? We have actually seen him um, see him progress from saying nothing and lying there doing nothing. And today he's able to actually wheel himself in a wheelchair and communicate. Right? His speech is getting clearer. It's not perfect as yet, but he can definitely move. He can definitely communicate, and is able to wheel himself in a wheelchair. That was not possible before. Right? And he's now able to actually study and learn as a normal child. Right? He's not actually under normal schooling, he's actually under special schooling, but he's actually learning through a tab, is able to operate this tab, watch movies, and learn. Right? And his healing is continuously he's continuously improving. Right? We have also applied this in cases in from a distance where we have been in using this dynamics, being able to actually pull up images on our phone, touch the image, send it to someone on WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger and tell them watch the image or hold or touch the image, and they have been healed. Right? Persons that persons that really were actually injured and were using walkers and crutches, you just send it to them, tell them look at it, and they were healed. We experimented with this in many different areas, from images to applying the dynamics to causing physiological changes in person, as well as from at a distance over the phone. This is actually put to test in a group that we used to actually conduct classes in called Adventist Identity, where we were able to actually have that being done with persons across the globe, applying these dynamics, causing hair to grow, legs to grow, persons got taller, giving themselves more height. Even recently, we have been able to see healings from cancer, persons that were terminal that were able to recover. Right? Now, through this process in particular, it was experimental, and so through that process, we can't say at all that it was flawless because the research was continuous. And with the continuous research, we at times applied what we had seen in the scriptures through the through the lens of the ancient Hebrew priests, and didn't see results, had to go back, find out what was the context, find out what was the dynamics that they were referring to, the dynamics that they were using, before we can actually see the results that we wanted to see. Right? We have actually been able to see person healed from COVID, from other life-threatening diseases. Um, we have even been able to form a council under the International Institute of Meteorology with master mentors, where we make decrees, judgments over the entire earth, and see these judgments fulfilled, meticulously and methodically fulfilled. Right? So, all of this in particular, all of the information that we'll be sharing here has actually come out of this period of investigation and experimental research. And this, of course, is an accumulation of well over 35,000 hours of pragmatic investigation into the ancient Hebrew priestly perspective of the scriptures to understand what the principle of the scriptures is, because it does have a principle. We at the International Institute of Pneumatology always say that we approach the scriptures, and it is true to its core that we are one institute that approaches scriptures independent of the westernized perspectives now, and we do not approach the scriptures as a book of doctrine, but a book of spiritual physics. Right? Just as everything in creation functions by laws of physics, we will be able to identify the laws of the spiritual, the law of spiritual physics, or the law of the physics of spirit that was found in the scriptures through the lens of the ancient Hebrew priests who taught through that principle, and it has proven to be very true and very dramatic in its manifestations. Right? I have also, in approaching this through the lens of the priesthood, been able to see a lot of interfacing with God, where one of my most recent examples was something was lost in my home, and I stood up in the middle of my living room, hearing a noise and didn't know where it was from, and applying this in particular, the spirit, applying this and speaking to God directly to help me locate it. I just told him, show me where it is, and the item or the device in particular began to go off to actually make more noise and increase volume. So I was able to, where I was able to locate it. We have experienced things like being in prayer and God responding to us in prayer via thunder. This is not a joke. This is not an exaggeration. This is all in the scriptures, but unknown to the Westernized Christian community. So at Sonship Lifestyle Community, I do apologize for not actually coming with a list of events of these events to actually quote for you. I just decided to do a. This is actually one of the first times I'm doing this, a very free introduction to this information that we're going to be sharing with you regarding healing, particularly how that applies, on what and how the garden narrative particularly demonstrates this, so that you can be able to apply it and see results in your body. Right? This is something also that I have been able to experience even recently. I actually had in the last couple of weeks, I've been in research, particularly concerning death, and through that period of time, began to struggle with some stomach issues. And through continuing the research of that in particular, we have been focused on really understanding what death is, what life is, to be able to mechanically and methodically engage it as a lifestyle. And through that research, this is just another type of research, just not healing in general, but being able to sustain life throughout the human body, throughout the body that you have, to sustain its power, to sustain its flow, to sustain living waters as a lifestyle. the dynamics that came out of that in particular has actually pretty much restored an infection that I had, and actually brought the body back to its to its place of being restored. All right. So um, I think I have actually shared sufficiently here. For those of you who actually joined me on this live here tonight, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me. I will not add to anything that I said here tonight, and I do apologize if the recount of these miracles in particular were a bit sketchy. But as I mentioned, I didn't actually come with a list. I just came on and just spoke off the top of my head. But most of what we experience is actually done through a particularly through just living through it as a lifestyle. 24/7 engagement and application of a lifestyle. From this, we have been able to establish frameworks, like literal structures, priestly structures through which we live and through which we walk in God. Frameworks that actually help us to apply the name of God and the spiritual physics and apply it to every area of life, from your spirituality to your relationships, your health, your homes, your family relationships, your romantic relationships, your marriages, business. We have been able to take this spiritual physics that we have found in the scriptures through the lens of the ancient Hebrew priests and apply it, and I've seen phenomenal results. All right. So next week in particular, I look forward to beginning to share garden dynamics. I This hopefully will not be um, just a session where I'm just sharing dynamics. So we like to keep this where we don't want to pour out too much information all at once, but we'll actually start with small portions or small aspects of the garden so that you can be able to understand the garden a little more and understand why Yeshua rose from the dead and walked right back into the garden and was identified by Magdalene as the gardener. Well, actually, well, by John actually. John indicating that he was the gardener and he was back in the garden. Right? All of the authority in the Bible, particularly, all spiritual authority, is actually because you are in the Garden of Eden, which is now known as the New Jerusalem. Right? And understanding the dynamics of this comes a lot more access to spiritual power and to synchronicity with Yahweh Elohim and in the name of Yeshua as your own. Right? Just as any ancient Hebrew priest that will take on God's name as his own and function through the logic and lifestyle of that name. All right, so I will now wrap this up here. My name is Zane Pei, as I mentioned, founder of the International Institute of Neonatology and Headmaster Mentor. And I look forward to the upcoming Friday evenings with you. You can find me here at 8 p.m. EST on Fridays after the dynamics of the garden. I'll also begin to share additional information. All right. And blessings and much love to somebody said hello, Rabbi. Blessings and much love. Your name didn't come up. Holy Sister Robin Kirk. Blessings and much love. I came on late to listen to the reply with vigor. I was busy memorizing Hebrews 13, 21. And I got it on pretty good too. I'm so excited to be learning more about living in the garden. I'm humbled to be able to share this with Sonship Lifestyle community as well as like Mindset Mentors. We will be speaking a lot more on this. There are very, very important dynamics that Yeshua is using because he functioned on earth prior to the cross as a priest. And so there are many things that he's doing that you're reading and you don't really pick up and don't understand because it is not the westernized perspective of it. It's the ancient Hebrew priestly perspective of it. Right? From simple things like saying be thou clean, that's a priestly instruction from a priestly perspective, to the casting out devils the way he did it, to healing others the way he did it, how he approached it, being the person of life, the woman touching him of his garment, all of those things are actually understood very clearly through the lens of the priest. All right, so stay tuned. Look forward. I'll see you on next week, Friday, where we will begin a very brief introduction to the garden so that you can understand what you're reading, to understand where you are now, and at least understand what you have been created to be, so that we can move away from all of the doctrinal and moral perspective of the scriptures and start functioning as spiritual mechanics, basically, spiritual physicists, by understanding the structure that is provided for you in the scriptures. All right, so this is going to be very different because the church has been predominantly dominated um, by doctrinal perspectives, doctrinal strengths, and that has led to now where we're actually looking at the Bible through quantum physics and quantum dynamics, which is an expression of the spiritual construct, but it does not actually explain the quantum world. But the present science doesn't explain the quantum world. The spiritual construct in the ancient Hebrew, from the ancient Hebrew perspective, pretty much establishes what it is, and so even quantum dynamics are an expression of these dynamics. All right. So, Sonship Lifestyle Community will be one of the first communities outside of the International Institute of Hematology to benefit from this. Um, it would be very brief, nothing much in detail, because to do that will be it take some time to really unpack the garden, so that our Greco-Roman mind can actually grab the construct and the structure of the ancient Hebrew mind. All right. So, on that note, blessings and much love. Thank each and every one of you for joining me. Robin Kirk, the person that said hello, the person that said hello, Rabbi Keturah. See you next week, Friday. Enjoy your night. Enjoy your weekend. Boom.